Welcome. Thank you for showing up for our spring Buddhist Studies class on Anatta, the Buddhist teachings on the impersonal or not self nature. And there may be a few of you who haven't been participating in the Buddhist Studies classes. Some of you have been doing it for a couple decades even. Some of you are sort of new, and maybe there are a few of you who are brand new to the ongoing Buddhist Studies classes. And we do, as opposed to so many of the programs at the center where there's no prerequisite, we do ask that people participating in the Buddhist Studies classes have an ongoing practice. Ideally, we'd all be sitting every day and have done some retreats. So there's this commitment. It's not for people who are interested just intellectually in the practice, but people who are actually hearing the teachings and then formally practicing with them, creating conditions like a morning sitting time where we're contemplating directly when conditions are really conducive about how those teachings support our understanding, the deepening of our understanding. It's being more real and intimate with the way it is, the nature of our body and mind, the nature of experience. So we're training, right? And we're using that relatively quiet time in the morning, in the evening, whenever we sit, to do that contemplation, to use the teachings and the study, integrating what we're learning from the study with our experience. So if you have any questions about the prerequisite, you can just reach out to me. Hopefully all of you received an email from me. I think I sent it on Friday with a few resources to begin your study. And if you didn't get that email, you probably didn't register. I'll send another email out in a day or two. So you can go to the public calendar online, find the Buddhist Studies class, just look under today on the calendar in the evening, and you'll see it listed there and register. And that way you'll get an email then later in the week. And the emails will keep repeating the resources. So if you don't need to worry, if you get that next email in a couple of days, you'll get all the resources that are there for you just to decide. It's not like everyone is going to read everything, and there's no particular order. I'm just putting out some resources, and you could kind of check it out and see what catches your eye and start there. And then go from there with the energy, with the time that you have. Everybody has different commitments in their lives. But the request is for people to do some study besides showing up on Monday night, or if you miss a Monday night, the class goes immediately on our YouTube channel, so you can listen to it anytime if you can't be here directly. And the other feature of the Buddhist Studies class is every other one. So next week and then our last week, week 4, we'll have a small group for the last 20 minutes or so. And this is not an optional part of the class in that small group. And it's basically your willingness, it's a generous thing, your willingness to be a human being with 2 or 3 other human beings about what you're learning in your practice related to the course. Just to show up as best you can. And of course, it's okay to pass, but it is a generous thing to just do our best, even if it's confessional, like, I don't really get it, and then talk about that. Or my experience doesn't seem to align with the Buddhist teachings, and then go from there. So it isn't like what you should say. You could say whatever you want. Everyone will have their 2 or 3 minutes. I'll talk a little bit more about this next week before we have the small groups. But I'm just saying that, and one of the nice things about being on Zoom, for those of you on Zoom, is you don't have to drive here, and you get to be a little bit more anonymous. You don't have to have your video on. I see a lot of you do, and that's great because it creates more of a virtual community for the people on Zoom. But people here in the room and people on Zoom next week, when our small groups are going to start. We don't leave the room and we don't leave the Zoom room for the small groups. We just stick it out. Now, people are always welcome because we put things up online. People can always listen to the Buddhist studies and just sort of be an anonymous person and not part of the small groups. But if you're showing up on Monday night, then you're part of the community and you're making the commitment to practice at home, to do some study, depending on how much time you have in your life, to do at least a little study besides showing up on Monday night, and to join in for the small groups every other week. So I think that's it for the basic introduction to the Buddhist Studies programs, classes. And one of our rituals that we've been doing for, well, we began now, so it's over almost 25 years we've been doing the Buddhist Studies classes. And we often chant the three refuges. We do it a little, not in a traditional way, a little slower, so that as a group, we can sing together. So it's a nice way of just coming together as a community. And here in the room, we've got some physical copies if you need it. Brian, if you could make sure it's in the chat. So it is in the chat for those of you online. You can just open it up and we'll do that chant. And it's just a Buddhist code for our practice. So when we say we're taking refuge in the Buddha, some of you might have that devotional connection to that person who lived 2,600 years ago, but you don't need that. What you need is, like, traditionally that person represents something that's here and now, this capacity, potential that we all have to be radically present or awake, intimate. That's really what Buddha means. And Dhamma, the second refuge that we take refuge in the Dhamma the way it is. So we're willing, as our refuge, as our way forward, to be intimate with the reality of how it is. Not our concept of how it is, but a more direct, generous exposure to the reality of the moment. Internally, externally, pleasant, unpleasant, subtle, gross, the whole package. And not discriminating, right? It's just like, oh yeah. This, in a sense, Dhamma, in a sense, another way to think of Dhamma as a refuge is understanding that the exposure to the present moment is our true teacher. There's something reality has to teach us, which means we need the Buddha, we need this capacity we have to be awake, intimate, clear, vulnerable, you could even say, to the reality of the moment, because we're changed by that. Our understanding is changed. And the third thing, the third refuge is Sangha. Often we think of this as spiritual community, but it's really the beautiful qualities that we see expressed by ourselves, by others, when we or somebody else is Buddha being intimate with Dhamma. So when the first two refuges are alive and well, then how we're navigating, living our life, the choices we're making, what we say and don't say, what we do and don't do, that really is what Sangha means. It's like when a being is in that place of being awake to the way it is, then when you observe them or when you are them, it's really a thing of beauty. And we feel it can be trusted, that activity, that you could say enlightened activity or awakened activity is a thing of beauty and something to be trusted and appreciated. And so we take refuge in that, those three things. So that's what we chant nice and slow. And we're going to do that now, and then I'll guide us through some meditation time, and then I'll introduce the study of Anatta, the Buddhist teachings on impersonal nature. So settle in for our sitting time and our chanting. If you want to use this gesture, you can. It's sort of a traditional gesture, both. And here in the West, I learned this as a Catholic growing up, but also in the East and just a gesture of respect. Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dhammang saranang gacchami. Sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddhang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. We'll settle into our sitting time. Listen to the body, making the adjustments that would be helpful. Our sitting posture, no matter our particular age or health of our body, there is a way for the posture to reflect our intention to be clear and relaxed, real, grounded, right in the middle, right here and now. So that in that way, our body, the posture is really supporting the intention in the practice to be clear and released, awake. And as you feel more settled, then turning the attention to the experience of hearing, resting and, in a sense, resting back in the experience of hearing whatever sounds are present. And we're learning how to relax and trust the truth that hearing is being known. Really simple. And letting it be for us as simple as it actually is. Hearing is being known. The hearing of the different sounds is being known. And as you notice any unnecessary efforting or any unnecessary projections, just letting that all fall away as best it can. So clearly, in our experience, clearly there is the experience of sounds being heard. As long as our ears are still sensitive, still operating, then hearing is being known. You might even catch the mind, the more subtle level of thought, the mind in a way, or the habits of the mind owning the experience of hearing, as if the mind were to say to itself, oh yeah, I'm hearing now, I'm doing that. But we're choosing to be really interested in the natural process of hearing, hearing being known, the simple truth of it. And just see for yourself, everyone see for themselves, whether we ever detect the one who's hearing. We experience the hearing, but do we experience the one who's doing the hearing? And this isn't something to think about, it's really more about our willingness to be interested in the actual process of hearing as it is for us. for a few more minutes. We're letting this simple experience of hearing, whatever there is to hear, be our teacher. Learning how to keep it in mind and allow it to be as simple as it is. Hearing is being known. Hearing is, but do we find the one who hears? We're learning to trust that things can become really simple, letting whatever is extra drop away. Hearing is being known, really keeping that in mind as a kind of training or training ground. Hearing is being known, whether it's just subtle ambient sounds or specific sounds. Is there anything personal in the hearing process? Of course, it can be projected onto the hearing process, but when we let things get really simple and straightforward, remember to value relaxation in the body and the mind. And the second exercise is to simply observe thought arising. Don't go looking for thoughts, but just aware of the space of the present moment, the space of the mind. but with a real relaxed interest in thoughts, the first moments of a thought arising. Relaxed and simply awake to the space of the mind in which thoughts tend to come and go. And just see with interest if you can notice when a thought arises in that space of the present moment, the space of the knowing mind. Especially if you can catch the very first moments of a thought arising. You don't have to do anything special, just intending to be awake there. And of course, observing what happens when a thought is recognized as being a thought. Although it might seem a little strange, there's nothing wrong or unusual about this wholesome desire to want to see more clearly, experience more clearly the nature of a thought arising, regardless of what the thought is. Just a desire, the sincere desire to want to be clear about that experience of a thought doing what a thought does. So over time, with practice, we see the truth that a thought arises, and then, of course, it ceases. And can this be known with wisdom, with a clear presence? And we're not judging thoughts. Any thought will do. So even thoughts about your practice, they also have the nature to arise and then pass away. So they can be observed. So again, we might have some sense, some intuition. Thinking is being known, but no thinker can be found. Just the experience of thinking being known. Of course, we might catch the habit of thinking that I'm the thinker, but that's just the next thought that arises, then passes. And so for the last few minutes, whether it's hearing being known or thinking being known or sensations being known, seeing being known, see if we can allow things to be as simple as they can be. In Buddhist practice, we always talk about it as something, some experience, some object of experience, and the knowing of it. So take a little time to stretch out, move your body if you need to. one of those resources that I linked to in that email that I sent last Friday is an article from about 12 years ago that Joseph Goldstein wrote, Busy Life, No Self, Everyday Practices to Realize Anatta. Recent Thoughts from Joseph Goldstein. It was published in IMS's newsletter. So you have a link to that. And in that, he talks about, for busy people, doing three-minute practices a day, using the hearing that we did just now, doing walking, but feeling the sensations of the body while you're walking in the same way that we are observing sounds, like sensations are being known. But we tend to, like when we're feeling our body, we tend to project a mental image of the body and the sense of I'm walking, I'm feeling these sensations. But when we train the mind to be just interested in the reality of sensations being known, it's almost, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience, it's not, it's an experience that's accessible to all of us, just as if sensations are happening in a big open space, even though there I am walking down the block in Minneapolis, but the actual experience is just a flow of sensation. But, you know, it's like without the mind imposing the idea of the body, the mental image of the body onto that dance of sensation being known. Right? So we can do it with bodily sensations, we can do it with sounds, and we can do it with thoughts too. And the important thing isn't that there's Mark practicing in order to discover something. The thing we're practicing to discover is already here. You know, whatever anatta is, emptiness, the impersonal nature, we've been swimming in it since day one, right? It's just that we're using practices and teachings to help us have a more real, a more intimate, a more honest, a more released or relaxed experience with the way it is. The basic, you know, the Buddha as a spiritual doctor, you know, his diagnosis was, because, you know, he diagnosed his own existential situation as a human being, you know, and the way he diagnosed it is, yeah, the heart, the mind is misunderstanding, it's misperceiving. So the cure is to cultivate a way of not misunderstanding and misperceiving. Like we're learning how to harmonize with the way it is, to align, to harmonize, to see clearly, to be intimate, to open up to. And that's the healing, the spiritually healing process. And we can't solve it from within our wrong understanding or wrong perceptions. Because then it's always like me, that very personal flavor that we all have, right? When we're sort of, yeah, okay, I'm a Buddhist trying to get free here. And, but from that perspective, we'll never resolve the problem. Because the mind in that perspective is making an assumption that there's a person here, me, who's got a problem, suffering, stress, self-centered dramas, that wants to be free of that. But the assumptions itself will keep the mind from waking up or from releasing what can be released. So we have to stop trying to be the suffering being who wants to get out of suffering. Because doing our spiritual practice from that point of view is the repeating cycles of samsara. It's just more of the same. I mean, we see it all over the place, you know, spiritual seekers, people trying to make the world better. but it doesn't get better. So what the Buddha figured out for himself and then taught for 45 years is like how to let the tangle, the vortex, the whirlpool, whatever, image we like about our existential situation, how do we allow it? How can it be allowed to resolve itself, basically? And really discerning, this is the really helpful piece that the Buddha added in his teachings, discerning really two things that make all the difference in the practice. One is the emphasis on that quiet, receptive presence, kind, patient, eventually fearless, meaning we're willing to feel whatever, see whatever shows up, comes and goes. And the other piece, so that real emphasis on sati, that we usually translate as mindfulness or awareness. And the other piece is these teachings that we'll be talking about this 4-week course on Anatta, but basically pointing out, because we need these deep teachings like the Buddha teaching us, you know what? It's just nature. It's not really personal. Whatever I'm aware of, whatever I'm thinking about, whatever I'm experiencing, it would be helpful, the Buddha is telling us, if I were to train my mind to see whatever it is I'm paying attention to as an unfolding natural process. So I'm having a difficult interaction with someone, or I'm thinking about something from long ago with a lot of nostalgia, or I'm speculating about the future, or whatever we're doing and whatever we're experiencing, to see it not from the self-centered frame, which is chronic, right? Because of our way of being conditioned in culture, that's just how we perceive and frame and understand and relate with that self-view, satya ditti, sakya ditti is the phrase in Pali, self-view, personality view. So to help us not do that, the Buddha gives us a training, which mindful awareness as receptive presence. And then an additional help, he gives us these teachings and these last 3 courses on the impermanent nature, the unsatisfactory nature, and the impersonal nature, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So those of you who weren't in the previous 2 courses, in the winter, I taught a course on the impermanent nature, anicca, and then Shelley just finished teaching a course on dukkha, the unsatisfactory nature of experience. So the Buddha's teaching us, these 3 things, anicca, dukkha, anatta. So when we are using mindful awareness, opening, we won't fall into habit, right? We're getting this pointing out, no, things are impermanent, they're ephemeral, everything's in motion. When we really listen, when we open, when we sense how it is, whatever we're opening to, thought, sight, sound, sensation, smell, taste, or there's really nothing but those 6 things, we'll see that it's a flow, it's an unfolding, it's a movement. It isn't a thing. Sight isn't a thing, sound isn't a thing, thought isn't a thing, sensations aren't a thing. But our concept can make things appear to have a permanence, a solidity that they don't actually have when we cultivate a wise presence, clear, simple presence. We see, we sense directly, we can confirm this in our own practice. It's like we might sit, as an example, we might sit, get settled, and then after a few minutes, we might just feel a lot of pain in the body, a lot of discomfort. And the discomfort can feel quite solid, But if we hang in there, if we've got some practice momentum, and we just keep opening and sensing, then the experience of our body of sensation might move from this very powerful idea that I don't like this hurts, my body hurts, this is a problem, and it just feels like that's the truth, because the concept that I have and the mental images that I have about my body, combined with the sensations, the superficial awareness of the sensations, can congeal into some very convincing story that this sucks. The ache in my knee, or the this and the that. But if we hang in there, we might shift the samadhi, the continuity and stability of present moment awareness may develop some momentum. And then we start to experience the same sensations, but without the congealing that our attachment, identification with thought can create. And so the sensations may be exactly the same, but the way the mind is relating and understanding those sensations, and the degree of subtlety in which the mind is sensing those sensations, it's that experience of the ephemeral nature, just not being a problem for anyone can be. And it's sort of shocking, like, oh, maybe this isn't a problem. It actually can feel good, even though the knee, in a sense, is still throbbing. But the experience of the throbbing isn't what it was. And it's a little even hard to talk about when we're in that, for lack of a better way of saying it, flow stage, where thoughts are moving, sensations are moving, and the mind isn't isn't identifying with the flow of sensation, the flow of thought. Right? It's like we might keep seeing that off-ramp of the thinking mind going to these sensations are a problem. There's no way I'm going to be able to sit to the end of the sit. What's wrong with my body? Is it just old age, or do I have cancer, bone cancer, whatever, It's like there are all these impulses to want to do our self-centered thinking drama about whatever the sensations that might be being felt. But then wisdom is seeing those thoughts come and go, part of the flow, the unfolding of mental activity. In the same way, wisdom is aware of the unfolding of bodily sensations and unfolding of whatever else is coming and going in the moment. So these three characteristics, these underlying characteristics, they're skillful means combined with awareness to help liberate the mind. They're gifts, right? And these gifts are for deluded people. Because if wisdom is really strong in our mind, and there's just a lot of momentum in practice, we don't need teachings on impermanence and the unsatisfactory nature and the impersonal nature, because a wise mind is already, that's what the wise mind sees, because the wise mind isn't distorted, right? There are those four distortions where we see permanence when things are impermanent. We see satisfaction when the experience isn't actually satisfying. We see self when the experience isn't personal. And we see beauty when something isn't actually beautiful. It's neither beautiful nor ugly. It's just what it is. But these distortions, so much of the time we are seeing things as being permanent, as being satisfactory. When I imagine, some of you now, when you imagine being home, comfortable in your bed with your favorite TV show on, or whatever, you're looking forward to in the future, that that idea is, oh, that will be satisfying. And as if that satisfaction that you'll experience when you get whatever it is you want. So you might want world peace. Peace. I'm sure some of you have seen that bumper sticker. Anyway, whatever it is you want, that the superficial way we relate to that idea, oh yeah, is it as if that satisfaction is somehow meaningful in a lasting way. I mean, think about how many things we really wanted. And there was this promise, like, yeah, but if you get that, it's going to be great. Well, we don't learn that lesson, but we can, and that's that just that understanding. Oh yeah, things aren't satisfying in that lasting way. That doesn't mean there isn't pleasure in life. Clearly there is, because we experience pleasure. But what pleasure is? Because we get confused. We think it's going to be the end-all pleasure, but it isn't actually the end-all. Just like pain, we think painful things, like, oh, I got to go get a cavity filled either this week or next week. And oh, I don't want that. And we just feel like, but been there, done that. It doesn't, because we can think, oh no. That's one of the advantages of having been sitting a long time. How many times in a sit with maybe the mind is particularly wild that time, or the body hurts in a really bad way. And it's like, oh, just, especially when you're in a public setting and you're sitting, you can't just move or get up and leave. Or you can, but it's embarrassing, so you stay. And but now, when the mind is starting to freak out, it's like, it's kind of interesting. It's like, because I've seen it so many times. Like, oh, I can't do this. It's too much. Even with really humiliating things, it's kind of, there's a real, and I'm not, I don't think I'm exaggerating. There's a real interest, like when something humiliating or embarrassing happens, it's still painful, but it's just like, is this really a problem? To now in this situation, to be the fool, or to be the disrespected one, or whatever the situation is, that it'd be a natural setup for the mind congealing around it. Because the mind, if we practice sincerely and with some continuity, we just see it so much that all the dramas that seem to promise heaven or to promise hell, we just keep tumbling along, we humans. So this, we're using these to transform our understanding, these three, anicca, dukkha, anatta. And with this course, we're going to be emphasizing the anatta, but in a way, they're different facets of the same thing being the way it is. And when we look at the way it is, a moment of thought, a moment of sensation, a moment of seeing, a moment of hearing. So whatever the experience is in the moment, we can notice its ephemeral nature, its unsatisfactory nature, its impermanent nature. And that just means we're seeing things clearly, meaning not distorted by seeing permanence in what's impermanent, seeing satisfaction in what is ultimately not satisfying, seeing self in what is not self, seeing beauty in what is not beautiful. Because when we, see something, like if you like the Kuan Yin statue in the corner or whatever you might find really beautiful, it's just sort of interesting to, be with something like a nice sunset or a beautiful tree, or whatever it is, the clouds in the sky over to the west, or just the fact that we're gathered in the way that we're gathered for the Buddhist Studies course, that could easily be experienced as something beautiful. But when we just sort of, like we were doing with hearing, just aware of that experience of, oh, this is beautiful. What do we see? We see, well, that's a thought. This is beautiful. And it comes and goes. Like, what is the beauty of the sunset or of the gathered here at Kamgram Meditation Center online or in person? And it's the same thing we can now do this course. With this course is when things seem personal, instead of feeling wrong when there's a personal drama going on in your heart, in your mind, and oh, I'm a Buddhist, so I'm gonna get in there and correct this ignorance because I'm told that things are not personal, and I got a really bad habit of making things or thinking things are personal. So I'm going to be vigilant about it, and I'm just going to keep getting on that horse, with my armor. I'm going to ride in, and I'm going to slay that tendency to take things personally, because I know, or at least I think I know, things shouldn't be personal, and that's my original sin. I take things personally, and when I get good, I'm going to stop taking things personally, and I'll get my reward. It begins with N, Nibbana or Nirvana. We'll get it. And but of course, that's just more of the setup, because then it feels like somebody's got to make things impersonal. So it's okay to be a somebody as long as this somebody wants to feel and see and open to things as they are. Because what does the transformation is that opening, that harmonizing, that intimacy, that seeing clearly. That will do it. So I think one of the useful ways, just because the practice is so pragmatic, when we're thinking about these three characteristics, or especially anatta, the impersonal nature, asking the question, when I open to experience, in what kind of way, relate to experience, in what kind of way does suffering increase? When I relate to experience, in what kind of way, in what way does suffering decrease? Right? So then it makes it a little bit easier to understand the value of these three characteristics. So like using anatta, and you can you want to confirm this for yourself, so you wake up tomorrow morning, Monday morning or Tuesday morning, and you make this strong resolve. Okay, I'm going to check this out for myself. So if I notice that I'm really suffering at any time today, I'm going to sort of trace back and look at how I'm relating to whatever's going on. And if I'm relating as if this experience is really personal, I'm going to just notice, intuit the cause and effect, that somehow taking this personally is related to the stress, the burden, the weight that I'm experiencing right now, the suffering that I'm experiencing. Or if you have a nice day tomorrow and your heart seems really light and free a lot of the time, then also do the same thing. Like, how is the mind relating? Are you taking things really personally, or is that more relaxed, that habit of taking things personally, seeing things more as the natural unfolding of causes and conditions? And a lot of people misunderstand, and I think next week we'll spend a little bit more time. This could be something really useful to bring up in the small groups at the end of next week's session about some of the shadows and yeah, just misunderstandings that come, how the teaching on anatta, impersonal nature, gets misused. It would be really useful to share and, with each other and to just observe this week, like trying to make things impersonal or imitating as if things are impersonal, pretending that things are impersonal when it feels really personal. Because we want to understand that it's okay to feel like this is really personal. And I feel personally really proud, or I feel personally really upset. Because we want to see that taking things personally, that's nature. Right? It's the nature of the mind, the personality, which is nature, just like the forest is nature and the swamp is nature. Our personality is nature, the body is nature. What exactly is not nature? Right? Everything's nature. So all of our neurotic habits, yeah, it's nature. To be neurotic, to be self-centered, to be greedy, to be hateful, that's nature. So the way out isn't to try to be good in a sense. I mean, there is a part of that, but the way that we be good, the way to be good is to understand clearly the way it is. So when we are acting out self-centeredness, wisdom and awareness sees that for what it is, nature. Because that is what's going to create a more creative ways to deal with that self-centered pattern that's showing up in our life. And also it helps when we're relating to other people's self-centeredness to see that that's nature. If something is happening in your personal lives or in the wider world now, try that during this course and then forever. Try to see things as impersonal processes that are unfolding because of causes and conditions. Whether you're getting a cold, or you're starting to get really frustrated with your lover, or you're falling in love with your puppy, this, of course, this is a natural process unfolding. Because of the supporting causes, it can't be other than what it is right now. And to keep that in mind, that impersonal nature. Because it really, you'll see, but we need to confirm it, each of us, you'll see how it undermines greed, hatred, and delusion. Greed, hatred, and delusion, to maintain their momentum, require sakyaditi. They require self-centered view. So when we see the mind obsessing about something in a way that involves a lot of greed or a lot of hate, but because we're doing the Buddhist Studies class and we're doing our study and we're practicing, we, instead of judging ourselves for obsessing with a lot of greed, a lot of lust, we observe it as a natural process, anatta. We use awareness and the teaching on anatta together. So the awareness, the presence, is supported by this wisdom we're borrowing from the Buddha until it's confirmed in our own practice that it's just nature unfolding here, right? So we're observing our mind in a storm, in a greed storm, lust storm, wanting something to happen in our life, whatever it is, but we observe it. And then part of what we're going to observe is like, what does that intervention do when we see it, feel it, plus adding this curiosity about, oh, is it a natural process unfolding? Does it build the greed? Does it cause the mind to get more entangled or less entangled in a greed? Let's confirm that. That's another thing that could be shared in small groups. So take advantage of the natural obsessions that happen this week for all of us, whether it's arising, or infected with greed or infected with aversion, ill will, fear, anxiety, jealousy, envy, just the basic torments that torment us. And then because we're doing the course, and really watch that impulse to want to either say yes to it, yeah, I totally, and rationalize it and reinvest in it, and also to judge it and be embarrassed by it and think that you got to slash and burn and get rid of it. I should be punished for being that way or thinking that way. And instead, just observe it as a natural process, which will include the other two. You'll see that it is unfolding. That's the anicca piece. And you'll see very clearly that in any moment the mind takes it personally, it hurts. It's unsatisfactory. It's a heavy weight in the heart. But when the mind isn't taking it personally, it still will have, would still have a particular flavor of unpleasantness if it's some difficult neurotic state. But there's something about it, the non-attachment to it, the non-identification to it, that has the flavor of freedom. This is from the Buddha. Happiness is solitude for one who is content, for one who has heard the Dhamma, and for one who can see. Right, so this is really the release of discontentment. So just the basic happiness of having some sense of what's important and what's not important. And the Buddha is kind of building in stages the different kinds of happiness that comes on the path. So the next line is, happiness is hurting nothing in the world, showing restraint among all living creatures. Right, so this is having some seclusion or some release from ill will. Like understanding ill will is not the way. Hate is not the way. When we have that deep understanding, we'll feel, of course, the impulse to get angry, to be hateful, but we'll also understand in that same moment, like, oh, that's not the way, right? So we won't, that doesn't mean we're immune, because we still have the underlying tendency to get angry. But if we're practicing, we'll see, as soon as it gets triggered, well, that's not the way, right? So we'll feel the anger, but we won't act on it because we know it's not the way. And there's a lot of safety in knowing that it's not that my condition has been totally transformed, but I know better, right? Than to act out like I'm not going to hit, or I'm not going to, cause harm. And then the third line is, happiness is not attachment to the world, having overcome all sensual pleasures. So this is at the stage where we have enough momentum that we can feel strong desires, the desire to get, the desire to get rid of, but we don't have to act on those desires because we know how to feel them. Like, I really don't want to get out of bed. Well, I'm not afraid of that feeling, right? It's a real yucky feeling. Or whatever it is, I really want that thing that that person possesses. I really want it. But I can feel that desire without having to act on it. And then the last level of happiness the Buddha is describing, but getting free of the conceit that I am, this is the greatest happiness of all. but getting free of the conceit, I am, this is the greatest happiness of all. And Andy Olensky, a scholar and teacher, he writes about that last line. The last and final obstacle to the highest happiness of all is the unconscious reflex of concocting a view of self that stands at the center of all that one thinks, says, and does. The Buddha here describes, no doubt for the first time, the experience of insight that stands as the culmination of the spiritual path. And this is the unique defining feature of his teaching. Because the other three are pointing to understandings that were already articulated, at the time in India. It's kind of common spiritual practice, the first three. But this realization that conceit I am, because even people like some of the Buddhist teachings were able to have deep meditative experiences, experiences of what we call in Buddhism the jhanas, these deep meditative absorptions where there's just a lot of, the mind is so secluded from self-centered activity, but that tendency of selfing isn't uprooted. And that's what the Buddha realized, is that because otherwise deep meditative experiences like a mystical experience of unity, just seeing the oneness. People, this is not, again, that there are probably many people in the room who've touched that experience of just feeling the unification in either meditation or walking in the woods, or can arise in different times, of course. When the mind isn't involved in separating experience, then that unification is what's left. But that tendency, that conceit I am, still operates. So it's like, oh, I'm experiencing the all oneness of it all. It's still a very healing, deep, beautiful experience, but it's still being held, constructed as something that I'm experiencing. I'm so grateful that I can touch into that deeper truth, right? So this happens, people have a good sit or a really, whatever it is, just a beautiful experience, religious, spiritual experience, but it is still infected with the conceit of I am. It's something that happened to me. It was really a high point in my life. So when that, it's really a turning point when the mind understands that everything has always been, is now, will always be empty of self. And even as a intellectual concept, right, which is, at the level we're talking right now, it may resonate with you intuitively, experientially, depending on your experiences. But even as an intellectual concept, it's a very powerful idea that there's no center, that this isn't referring back to me or to something. And as I mentioned earlier, that even we don't have to be afraid or get rid of personal or self-centered activity, because it's also empty of self. It's also, like I was saying earlier, just nature. Given the conditioning, the cultural conditioning in particular, that we've been conditioned by, of course the mind is going to think that way. Something happened last summer around retreats and being invited to teach, a different place. And that, it's just how that is, that deep tendency, I don't know, maybe all the way back to childhood and sports, and when you get picked to be on a team, it probably goes as far back as that. But like, and just because I didn't really care on some level, but also because I didn't cover it up, just to see that hurt, that sort of feeling of being wounded, not love. Don't they love me? Don't they want me to be there with them? This isn't fair. Just all those sort of thoughts. But to see all that and not to be afraid or not to feel like somebody's got to put the kibosh on it because, oh, wait, I'm a Buddhist teacher. I shouldn't be thinking that way. I should be having these emotions or feelings because it's empty. Don't you know? Wasn't I listening? But really the teaching and the insight that comes from the practice, it really allows us to be real, to the ways that our minds have been conditioned, they get to express themselves. And it's the practice that isn't afraid of Mark being Mark. And that's actually allows us to, because, otherwise we end up repressing the tendency because we're so embarrassed by it, and then it's going to sneak in somewhere else. You push it down there, it shows up over here. Doesn't really work. Another passage from the Buddhist teachings where he said, just as a dog tied by a leash to a post or a stake keeps running round and circling round that very post or stake, in the same way, an uninstructed, run-of-the-mill person assumes form to be self, or the self as possessing form as in the self, or the self as in form, right? So identified with the body. That's why, like the instructions from that article by Joseph Goldstein, to just look at hearing and get really relaxed and intimate, and really that sincere desire to see the experience of hearing as it actually is. And what we come to is there's hearing being known. So there's always those two pieces, the hearing and that it's being known, and that's it. We never discover by me, getting known by me. We don't see that. We just see the sound that is being known. And you can't even separate those two things, the sound from the being known. But it's sort of like two facets of the experience of hearing. There's the sound, the particular pitch or tone or quality of the sound, and there's consciousness of it, right? It's being known. And that's it. But we have to see it 10,000 times before it really dawns that that's it. So it's really about the discovery of what's not there. The term emptiness, which gets used a lot, especially in the later schools of Buddhism, sunya or sunyata, related to the term anatta. It's really about, they use the term or translate it as emptiness because it's seeing that, oh yeah, there's this being known and it's empty of anything else. That's all it is. Like in each of our experience right now, there's hearing being known, seeing being known, touches being known, smells being known, taste being known, mental activity being known. And that's it. So, and this is just some aspect of nature. Whatever this consciousness of what's being known, whatever that is, that's also the activity of nature. Just like everything else that's happening. And when we realize that, it's like it's a backpack that has 100 pounds of stones in it, all of a sudden it's dropped. Because our subjective experience until a moment of deep insight is having normalized that heavy backpack, that that self-centered framing that is arising with each experience. Like even if you're having some sense of an experience that I'm not getting this, which would be totally appropriate, right? But it's such a relief when we realize that that thought, I'm not getting it, is just that being known. Because it's miserable to be a spiritual seeker who thinks they should be getting something, right? If we put that on, that's the 150-pound backpack. Why aren't I getting it? It's probably the teacher's fault. You know, or, you know, I haven't been that sincere, you know, and maybe I do have a glass of wine every once in a while. And, or, you know, we just start whatever we do with it. We get, it's, you know, a tangle within a tangle, a thicket of views, as the Buddha might say. A couple more things I'll read in the last 5 minutes, just from the Buddhist teachings. Then the wanderer, Vacchagotta, approached the Blessed One and said to him, "How is it, sir, that there is a self?" Oh, how is it, sir? Is there a self? When this was said, the Buddha was silent. And so then the person goes, "Then, Master Gautama, is there no self?" A second time, the Buddha was silent. Then the wanderer, Vacchagotta, rose from his seat and departed. Then, not long after the wanderer left, Venerable Anatta said to the Blessed One, "Why is it, sir, that when the Blessed One was questioned by the wanderer, he did not answer?" And the Buddha said, "If Ananda, when I was asked by the wanderer, 'Is there a self?' I had answered, 'There is a self,' this would have been siding with those who are eternalists, right? That there's some eternal soul. And if, when I was asked, 'Is there no self?' I had answered, 'There is no self,' this would have been siding with those who are annihilationists, right? That sort of like a materialist. Whatever this is just, you know, this kind of elements or physicality, and then that ceases at death. If, Ananda, when I was asked by the wanderer, 'Is there a self?' I had answered, 'There is a self,' would this have been consistent on my part with the arising of insight that all phenomena are not self, right? Because this is something that we experience in practice. It just arises when there's enough continuity, stability, a present moment awareness. It will just naturally arise that, like I was saying different times during the talk tonight, you know, there's this being known, and that's it. And when the mind sees it clearly enough, there arises in the mind a very definitive, clear, confident, there's no self. This is just nature. You know, it's sort of like seeing things, and finally the mind comprehends the underlying truth. Oh, it's just this. That's it. And it's such a departure from the conditioning that there is a self, that those first insights are big kind of seismic events in the mind and the heart, because it's so unlike how my mind or our mind has been conditioned to see things. And if, when I was asked by him, 'Is there no self?' I had answered, 'There is no self,' the wanderer, already confused, would have fallen into greater confusion, thinking, 'It seems that the self I formerly had does not exist now.'" Right? Because when we're so convinced that I am, I am who I am, Popeye the Sailor Man. Sorry if I dated myself. Then when we hear the teachings on not self, we just think that somehow there's a way for me to get away from myself, as opposed to getting interested in this very personal, self-centered experience I'm having, but seeing it with new eyes, seeing it as nature. And that's what I was saying earlier about be on the lookout when I was talking about shadows. being on the lookout for judging yourself for self-centered activity, and being ashamed of self-centered activity, instead of a sincere practitioner being interested. Oh, look at self-centered activity. What is this? Let me get intimate with this. Let me see it as something being known. See its changing nature, its unsatisfactory nature when there's identification with it, and its impersonal nature, that it is just what it is. It's not referring back to anything besides something being known. So I'll leave it here. It's 9 o'clock. Thanks for your attention. We'll have time for questions next week, but feel free if there's some good questions that you think would be useful to bring up in my talk next week. You can always send me an email, and I'll resend that email that I sent on Friday with a few more resources. So make sure if you haven't registered to register. If you'd like to help with the program hosting for the week 2, week 3, and week 4, let me know. Maybe you can come up right afterward. And it just means getting here at 7 o'clock or a little bit later, and just making sure that people who are here for the optional sit have a quiet stay and help close the building up at the end of the night. Yeah, you can just let me know. See you next Monday, everyone.